gentlemen, you'll recognize this book from my part 1. Part 2 deals with, in part 2, we'll be dealing with sapphics, just as in part 1, we dealt with catullics. The point of view, including both of them in a book of the Heaven 11, is that each of them is built on an 11-syllable line. So catullics go like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and a 4 and 5 and 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Now, Sappho did an interesting thing. She comes several centuries earlier than Catullus, but she already had a more complicated idea, really, form-wise. She uses 3 of these in a row, these 11-syllable lines, and then she ends with a 5-syllable. I thought of saying the rhythm chart for you to give you a sample of what her trademark stanza sounds like, what the rhythm pattern is. But it occurred to me that they are so intensely musical, I'm going to sing it instead. 1 and 2 and 3 and a 4 and 5 and 1 and 2 and 3 and a 4 and 5 and 1 and 2 and 3 and a 4 and 5 and 1 and a 2 and... Isn't that lovely? That's her trademark stanza, and I've written 50 of them. The sad thing, though, is that fewer than 50 of Sappho's poems survive. She wrote vast numbers. All the ancients agree on this, and not only that, but they were of the highest quality. Plato suggests, or he is accredited with having said, that she deserves to be considered the 10th of the Muses. There were traditionally 9 of these culture goddesses. She should be the 10th. She's that divine. She wasn't just admired, she was adored. She has a bisexual vision like that of Shakespeare and other worthies whom we have studied, such as Hafiz and Shakespeare. Marlowe we haven't done yet, but Giordano Bruno has this aspect too in his vision. However, there are so few of her poems, often you cannot tell whether the speaker is a man, or rather the addressee is a man or a woman, but very often they are women. Now, what I have done is, and I will talk about the bisexual envisioning in a couple of the later poems among the half a dozen I sampled tonight, but I'd just like to start with something very musical to show you how much fun it is to sing the way she does. Here we go. Light emergent swiftly from cloud occulting, here and there as breath in the heaven races, brightens all the room where I breathe, exulting, noting the traces. Brighter, dimmer, mood with the alteration, calm yet vivid, cresting and then subsiding. Waves are brought to mind with a vague elation, growing, abiding. Face of nature, varied and animated, lips and eyes in movement with you conversing, she, in strength and depth which are freed and fated, favor aspersing. Whispers, I, alertness entire engendered every time her mind is aroused to motion, thrill imbibe, accept the refreshment tendered. Gentle her potion. You notice what I did there. Lots and lots of rhymes. The Greeks and the Romans did not rhyme. I've often made that point. And in general, you can write perfect sapphics, as Sappho did herself, without rhyming anything. But I also like hybridity. I like to introduce modern discoveries like rhyming, which didn't really come into popularity until the Middle Ages. I call that modern. Let's, what was that poem about? Just basically sitting in my rocking chair and watching the changing patterns of light, which are caused by clouds partly covering the sun and then moving on, how they change the illumination on the walls and on the carpets and everything else, and give you a sense that somebody is talking to you in light movement. Here's number 76. Here we are continuing to deal with the theme of the sun, I'm talking about my rewirement. Some people would call it a retirement, but I don't use such a word. And the first one a substitute I thought of was retoolment, and that's not bad. I'll give myself some points for that, but rewirement, now that's much more lively. And I asked myself, I wake up very happy in the morning because I'm free to work very hard. I work much harder than I did while teaching for 35 years, but I work on things that I chose and for the world, not just for a select group. And what does that make you feel like? It makes you feel as if, and here's the best metaphor I could come up with, the sun god driving the chariot across the sky. I've retired, resiled, and rewired, and now would eagerly respond to the power summons. Grab the reins, the chariot guide from sunrise, welkin traversing. The welkin is actually, in German it means clouds, but in English it evolved into a synonym of sky. Daily you've direction, a task, horizon, glad to follow, gliding athwart the upper sky, control kept firm while the mains a-flaming, steeds are invigored, heart attuned, the tiding of waves below me, current never aging though newly wrinkled, I, alive, new bivigant, through the blueness breathe as the cloud wind. Nubivigant just means traveling in the clouds. That was fun to write. They're just total fun to write. It was no problem at all to come up with 50 of them. Now here's a very interesting one, and I'm only doing about half a dozen, so we're already just almost halfway through. The third poem that I want to share with you tells about my experience as a teacher of English for a month in Shechem, which is an agricultural settlement like an Israeli kibbutz an hour away from Cairo. I taught English there. I taught English to the English teachers of the community school. They have a beautiful agricultural community, absolutely sustainable and nothing but organic. Very good. I was offered free underwear and pajamas made of the fine cotton that they raised when my suitcase arrived too late. It was a wonderful time. And here I recall a particular episode. I wasn't just visiting in Egypt and learning about Egypt. They ran their colony according to the anthroposophical principles of Rudolf Steiner, who wrote about 100 years ago. He had his own special vision. I don't particularly espouse his system of theology, but I'll tell you this. He was a genius in the arts because he invented something called eurythmy. And you know what that is? It's a technique for taking syllables, consonants and sounds and the combinations of them in words, and translating them into gestures. He made a positive dictionary of such translations, and then he proceeded to apply it coaching ballet. It's an astonishing thing to have done. And there happened to be a Steiner-style dance troupe doing eurythmy in the Shechem camp when I was there, and I was asked to be their coach to read aloud at rehearsal a Shakespeare sonnet and do it many times so that they could try out different ways of spacing and placing and varying their gestures that would translate the words into sound. What an experience. I celebrate that here in this Sapphic number 77. Let me take the sounds that we make in speaking, then invent for each an expressive gesture. Every lyric poem will turn to movement. Come, we can dance it. So had Rudolf Steiner decided. Next, he, draftsman, choreographer, drew examples. Full ballets he'd build on a new idea. Word into motion. Teaching English, I, at the modern Shechem, desert farm community close to Cairo, helped a troupe of traveling Steiner dancers, eurythmy envoys. I'd recite with feeling a Shakespeare sonnet, Their director chose, and would view it turning smoothly into dance by a rapt translation. Charmed, I would marvel. In the place where I was staying, they happened to have a library with a number of books containing dance diagrams and pictures of dances done in eurythmy, which is just Greek for good rhythm, according to the Steiner principles. The man was amazing. This is such a fine idea, eurythmy. I recommend it. Now we have to go on to something else. Oh, the next one is about science. I was reading a biography of Einstein by Einstein. I studied German so long. Why do I have to say Einstein? Einstein by Walter Isaacson. There are also quite a number of poems here, more than half a dozen, that draw ideas from his biography of Leonardo. Here is an idea that he says, that he states it right at the beginning. I use it as my epigraph. A kilogram of mass would convert into approximately 25 billion kilowatt hours of electricity. More vividly, the energy in the mass of one raisin could supply most of New York City's energy needs for a day. One raisin. Go and slowly gaze at a raisin, laggard. That's a Bible quote hidden in there. In King Solomon's Proverbs, one of the verses says, Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider its ways, and be wise. Go and slowly gaze at a raisin, laggard, ponder things I've written and reconsider. Guard yourself while doing it, falling backward. That is the peril. It'll knock you off your feet, in other words. Raisins, they've imploded before. Be cautious. Merely when imagined, they knock you over. 100 billion cells in your brain are helpless, facing a raisin. Fire mosaic spoke to the olden Hebrews. God himself appeared to be hid within it. Activated raisin would God's dominion seem to be holding. Turn lest godly fruit when beheld consume you. Hapless man to powder of ash be crumpled. Zeus appeared to Semele. When she viewed him, flaming she perished. Semele was the mother of the god Dionysus. Her deepest, most profoundly felt wish was that she might see the Lord of the universe, Zeus, in his true form. That wish was granted, and she was incinerated on the spot. But Dionysus was rescued from her and grew up to be the god that we know. Here's another one on myth. It refers to the fact that I attempted a translation of Ovid's Metamorphoses. I just began it and tried to see, with my comments, of course, in accompanying verses on facing pages, how far I would get into the huge book of, it's got 15 divisions. They're each called a book. 15 books. I actually got about halfway through book 2. Book 1 was total fun. There was Genesis and the flood and all kinds of things that I recognized from the Bible. But quite near the beginning, not more than halfway through book 2, all of a sudden Phaeton asks his father Phoebus, the sun god, if he couldn't drive the chariot across the sky for just one day. You see where I got that image for that earlier Sapphic. Here's what happened. I translated that part, and then I had a slew of things to say about it. But I didn't want to go any further, and you know why? Because I felt we had done a strange thing. We had taken a giant leap, the biggest possible, from Genesis straight to Apocalypse. Because what Phaeton did, he predicted, he emblemized, he caused. We call it climate change. Mythic lore I've quoted to show the peril. Awe-inducing energies born of nature bring to hapless humans that try to tame them. Hourly the moral sounds for you and me and is getting louder. We have seized Promethean fire and fettered, are we now, a vulture, a change of climate, ripping our innards. Ion Metamorphoses, Roman Bible, writ by poet Ovid, began to comment. Yet the part where Phaeton lost control of sun heat had stopped me. Here part 2 had wakened the heart in horror, painting nothing less than apocalyptic doom, environmental disaster. Ovid, you had foreseen it. And now for my last 2 short Sapphics, I would like to give you meditations on the idea of bisexual vision, so memorably embodied in the work of Sappho, sometimes called Sappho of Lesbos. That's where she lived. This, by the way, is about waking up in the morning and having dreamed about a picture of a saint that I saw in Turkey. There's an area called the, what is it called? Cappadocia, which is full of strange Dali-esque rock formations and all kinds of strange caves inside. And one of the caves have mostly been turned into churches in the course of time by Christian hermits, and some of them are made into churches. And one of them has a wonderful illustration of Saint Onuphrius. He's worshipped today in let's say, Latino Catholic churches as Onofrio. But if you look up Onofrio, I did that and I didn't find any mention of the bisexuality. That part, I think, is not emphasized today. You have to go back and look at the Greek accounts of Onuphrius. Here we go. Heard the name Onofrio on awaking. Omen, Saint Onuphrius on a cave wall. Church in Turkish hills, Dali-esque depicted. Still I remembered. Hairy body, naked except for loincloth, made of desert leaves, and the breasts were female. Some have claimed he once was an overlusty maiden. Her prayer, that she might be saved from the great temptation, which too long her spirit had overwearied, God had granted. Turned to an aged, wrinkled man, she was thankful. Let me laud the saint for a sign and emblem, like revered Tiresias for the Grecian, each, both man and woman, a twofold vision given, prophetic. Tiresias turned into a woman one day when he happened to be walking along and saw a couple of snakes coupling in the road in front of him. And some years later, he saw the same thing happening again with the snakes, and he turned back into a man. Well, here I'll conclude now with Dionysus. Dionysus' birth. Dionysus is a bisexual god, assuredly. His feminine qualities, his haters and despisers call them effeminate, and him the same, are emphasized in the Bacchae, which is about a terrible tragedy about conflicts of viewpoints regarding the bisexual god Dionysus. Sometimes I say Dionysus, sometimes Dionysus, because half my teachers have said it one way and the other half the other. Dionysus' birth was a twofold symbol, male and female, vividly shown, attractive. He in scorn effeminate would be labeled soon by his jailers. Human sexuality meant a spectrum. We will subtle and complicated patterns entertain in vastly imagined crafting. None may constrain us. Modern psychologists have depicted, there are many images you could use to metaphorize different aspects, but one of my favorites is a spectrum, a continuum. So we go from, let's say, female at one end and male at the other end, and we, in our progression across the continuum, we look at every possible kind of combination or intermediary state or combinatory state, and it then is laid out for us in writers as early as Freud that human beings can be found at any point along the spectrum, and what's more, you can be found at different points of the spectrum at different times of your life. And I would go further and suggest at different hours of the day. I'm a poet, player of roles unnumbered. Yes, I love Promethean flame portrayal. I like to be a sun god now and then. Yet at other times with a Danaean portrait and blended. Danae, a shower of golden ducats. I am fond of Heine's delightful phrasing, got from Zeus, who visited in her chamber. He showered her with gold. Rembrandt presented this compliant lady, with joy receiving beams of morning sun through an open window. Male and female blent is our poet nature, getting and spending. Thank you.